Yeah, this is coming from Time Magazine, a big spotlight that they are shining into the darkness here at Time Magazine. This is written by Robert Jones. The headline is not going to surprise anybody, but it is the culmination of what we've been seeing for a couple of years.
There's
and it goes
propaganda
like this.
rooster letting his presence be known.
Oh, you can hear him, huh?
I heard him, yeah.
Oh, he must be he must be at the perfect sort of, frequency, because he's pretty far away. He's not very loud around here. So if he's breaking through the sound gate, he's the propaganda rooster is hard at work today, folks. And here it goes. Here's what the propaganda rooster does want you to hear. The headline is, "It's time to stop giving Christianity a pass on white supremacy and violence."
Okay, who is giving
Who is giving
a
pass?
Not just white supremacy, but specifically violence. I would like to know who is like, yes, violence, just open violence. Christians.
No, we're giving the Christians a pass. They can be as violent as they want, apparently. I'm going to do my best to balance reading the article, letting it speak for itself, and commenting only when it is important. I am not expecting that I will do a great job of this, because there are a lot of triggering things to me in this, but I will just go for it. And Gons, you just let me know when you want to speak up.
Okay.
And it goes like this. In the wake of the massacre in Buffalo, we have all naturally tried to understand what could have caused someone to commit such a horrific act of violence.
FBI. No, excuse me. I'm sorry. I just
FBI. Okay.
Yes.
This young white man linked his motivations to fears about demographic and cultural changes in the U.S., dynamics that he believed were resulting in the replacement of, quote, the white race. The shooting has spurred a national discussion about the mainstreaming of these concerns, often summarized under the term, quote, replacement theory. Most of the attention has been given to the demographic component of this theory, while the cultural aspects have been overlooked. But the fear of cultural replacement has an unambiguous lineage that gives it specific content. At the center of, quote, the great replacement logic, there is and has always been a desperate desire to preserve some version of Western European Christendom. Far too many contemporary analysts and even the Department of Justice have not seen clearly that the prize being protected is not just the racial composition of the country, but the dominance of a racial and religious identity. If we fail to grasp the power of this ethno-religious appeal, we will misconstrue the nature of and underestimate the power of the threat before us.
Okay, I got some things. You got some things?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I have one thing, I will hear your thing.
You want to hear my thing first or your thing first?
Well, okay, I'll just mention it.
Yeah, mention your thing.
He's basically, what he's setting up here is, no, you don't get it. It's not just about race. This isn't just racism. This is, a cleansing of all. This is a religious war. This is a crusade, because it's not just about race. It's about being not Christian. It's these Christians that fear, having the Christian culture replaced. That's the big part. And, which again, it's about race. I mean,
yeah, they're trying to make it not about race, but it is. Like, to them,
it's
these people
about
here.
race. Like, the guy was unstable. He was getting influenced by the FBI and other things online or whatever.
Sure.
It was about race. He was a racist kid. He was a mentally ill kid. He was, on the radar. And he was, unfortunately...
Fake news, Basil, FBI.
Well, I'm just talking
from on the radar.
Sure, yeah. From the perspective of, the story,
right.
It's that, he was a racist person.
Right.
And what Times and Robert Jones is trying to do here is like, no. It's not race. It's Christianity.
Right.
They're scared of Christianity being replaced.
Yeah.
And that's the moment I have to be like, you know what? No, it's not. It's about race. This was a sick, dark person. but he'll go into more of it. But you can see they're trying to sort of Aikido the concept. It's almost like the Great Replacement, of course, took over the news cycle and everybody knows about it now in the context of race. And now comes this sort of turn. It's like a bait and switch.
Right. And we knew this was coming. We've been saying the setup.
Saying this exact thing.
Yeah.
So what do you got?
Let me mention real quick. So the part that got me was, one, how they were talking about how the replacement theory, this theory, the spurred a national discussion about the mainstreaming of these concerns. Yeah, the people mainstreaming this topic is really the mainstream media. It was kind of like a fringy thing. So, yeah, I don't know why they're like, oh yeah, it's the people that are believing nonsense. Here's the other thing to keep in mind, and this is just, again, more background information, but this whole notion that there's an ethno-religious appeal. If we think back to history, we've pointed this out. 1951, Truman set up the Psychological Strategy Board, the PSB. It had the CIA, Department of Defense in there, and it says in their documents it was made for the potential role of religion in psychological warfare. And so, the quote, potentialities of religion as an instrument for combating communism are universally tremendous, and religion is an established force which calls forth men's strongest emotions. But our overall objective in seeking the use of religion as a Cold War instrumentality should be the furtherance of world spiritual health. That's what they said. Okay, so if you think about, okay, it's a controlled thing from on high in the government. It was like an established thing to weaponize the church. If this guy is calling, there's like two sides to this, because on one hand, he's like, hey, you got to call out this Christian thing. So you can kind of put it in the context of, oh, they're calling out this Truman sort of establishment, but that's not what they're doing. It's almost like, I don't know. Are you following me, or are you losing me?
No, you're making total sense, and I think we should keep reading, because I think it'll flesh itself out.
Yeah.
In a 180-page racist screed, the Buffalo shooter wrote that he was particularly inspired by the man behind the 2019 massacre at two mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand, which claimed 51 lives. The Christchurch shooter also left a manifesto entitled "The Great Replacement," which talked at length about the Muslim invasion of Europe. So the incident that most inspired the Buffalo shooter was a man of European descent murdering Muslims, praying in mosques located in a city pointedly named Christchurch. Almost like it's perfectly lined up.
We didn't point that out before or anything.
To mobilize,
dude. What's his name? Who's the author of this article?
Robert Jones.
Bob.
To mobilize exactly what you're talking about, which is, yes, look, religion is used and manipulated by elite ruling class,
government.
Groups.
It's got
I'll just say
roots
groups. Different types of groups specifically have documented the use of religious agitation. We did it in Afghanistan and Iraq.
Yes,
we specifically, you talk about the Shiites and the Muslims, and Sunnis, the Sunnis and the Shiites, and how they hate each other so much. There's documentation of the U.S. military calling in all the religious leaders. Once we invaded Iraq, we called in all the religious leaders. We put them in a big room, and then we separated them out, and then we provoked both sides to hate each other. It was part of the strategy. It is a common, well-known thing. So, the idea that a corporate news person would be basically doing exactly that right now is just part of the plan. Let's keep going. The Christchurch shooter, in turn, took particular inspiration from the ideology of a terrorist who killed nearly 100 people at a youth camp on Utoya Island in Norway in 2011. The Utoya shooter also published a manifesto which contains clear white Christian nationalist appeals throughout. He asked God to help him succeed in his mission to expel all Muslims from Europe, and he decried the way multiculturalism was deconstructing European culture and European Christianity Christendom. Toward the end of the document, he proclaimed, "Onward, Christian soldiers, celebrate us, the martyrs of the conservative revolution, for we will soon dine in the kingdom of heaven."
Psyop, psyop, psyop.
Yeah,
My
exactly.
gosh, come on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So obvious, but okay, sorry.
In the U.S., but see, and that's kind of the funny part about it, because like if you are Christian, you can read something like that and be like, "Oh yeah, no, I mean, not this." He may or may not have been Christian, but he certainly is under
These
the
are like-
influence of something else.
These are talking points that the FBI and certain intelligence agencies made as threats to America back in like 1998.
Exactly.
When they had
They're catalogs.
the Armageddon papers or whatever they were called. So
Exactly.
yeah, they
In the US,
checks off that whole list.
It's basically a checklist of all of the PSYOP operations.
Yeah, weaponized white supremacy in the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In the U.S., this drive to preserve white Christian dominance undergirded the worldview of the Ku Klux Klan when it reemerged in the early part of the 20th century. We rightly remember the terrorism aimed at Black Americans, but the KKK was also explicitly anti-Jewish and anti-Catholic. It existed to protect the dominance of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant America. Yeah. Okay. Exactly. Okay. Thank you. We know what the KKK is. Great. Like, how is that relevant to just like Christianity in general? But okay. In 1960, in my home state of Mississippi, Governor Ross Barnett regularly blended his Christian identity with talk about the threat of white genocide. Okay. We get it. You had a racist pastor, Robert Jones. We get it. Off the campaign trail, Barnett also served as head of the large men's head of the large men's Sunday school program at the most. Is it a Sunday school program for large men, or is it a large men's Sunday school program?
You know what it probably was? It was probably a men's group, like a large men's group, and it got messed up in translation or notes or something.
Something, yeah. Large men's
That's if I'm giving them a benefit of the doubt.
But also Sunday schools for children. So again, I'm not sure how familiar this guy is with, church. Program at the most influential church in the state, First Baptist Church. After his successful segregationist campaign, oh, you mean like Biden? Okay. FBC blessed him with a consecration service and a gift of a pulpit Bible in recognition of his protection of their white and Christian supremacist worldview.
Oh, did they say that? They said, "We give this to you in defense of white supremacy in our Christian supremacist worldview."
Thank you. That's a good point. In the deconstruction of this article, I thought that exact same thing.
Good.
That is not a quote for the prize. That is just him saying words. And there's no, there's no source or picture. There's no nothing. He's just saying, hey, I had a racist pastor and he won a racist award from First Baptist Church, which is the most general name for a church in the country.
Well, plus, so here's the other thing. And this article kind of gets into it as well. Every article that's talked about this issue of the race in America and all that kind of stuff, they all point to how there is a categoric sort of decline of the white man in Europe and the U.S., which I think is fascinating because it's like, we must get rid of it. And then it's like, it's declining. And it's like, yeah, keep declining. Is that what they're going for? I mean, it's just weird how it's all...
Well, in the talk about the Great Reset, it's very funny, and we've already pointed this out in other episodes, where they will admit that, like, yes, the whites are becoming a minority, and Christianity is becoming a minority, and these people are afraid of whites and Christians becoming a minority, but it's all a conspiracy, it's not real, et cetera, and it's a very confusing sort of doublespeak thing.
Yeah.
Now, he goes into why are we seeing the rise in white supremacist violence over the last decade? In short, in the U.S. context, the election and the re-election of our first black president coincided with the sea change of no longer being a majority white Christian nation. As I noted in my book, The End of the White Christian America, white Christians went from 54% to 47% in that period, down to 44% today. These twin shocks to centuries of white Christian dominance set the stage for Donald Trump. which is funny because it's like, okay, so white Christians, there's less and less and less of them, and they're no longer the majority. And
Then we got Trump.
Somehow the minority elected Donald Trump. So it's their fault, but it's kind of like opposite of how elections work. I don't know. It's just weird. Trump's Make America. Oh, this is a great little leap here. Trump's Make American Great Again formula.
Wow. He can't even get the quote right.
He doesn't even get it right. Again, he says Make American Great Again, which is not it. This is Time magazine.
Bob, you need to find another job, man.
Make American Great Again. That's the second just sort of erroneous. It's not even a typo. It's just an erroneous fact. Yeah.
And especially because it's in quotes. It's like, exactly. It makes it even worse. Like,
quoted it and didn't get it right. That's what I mean. And you know what? When you're deconstructing and analyzing these articles, it is Time magazine, one of the number one legacy, legendary, highly regarded royal news outlets, and not a single person, an editor, a proofreader, a copy editor, nobody could spot that Make America Great Again should not be Make American Great Again. Either it's incompetence on the part of Time, or it's something on purpose, like it's a misquote or an erroneous thing. I don't know. It's just weird. Who knows? It's suspect, though. Trump's Make American Great Again formula, the stoking of anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim, anti-black sentiment while making nativist appeals to the Christian right, contains all the tropes of the old replacement theory, the nostalgic appeal of again, in quotes, the nostalgic appeal of again harkens back. The word again harkens back to a 1950s America when white Christian churches were full and white Christians comprised a supermajority of the U.S. population. A period when we added, quote, under God to the Pledge of Allegiance and, quote, in God we trust to our currency.
When did that happen?
I thought you'd like that.
Yeah.
I thought you'd like that.
I believe that did happen right after this.
That was part of what you're referring to, which was the very specific, intentional creation of the sort of religious conflicts that we are allegedly suffering today. Was a purposeful shift and creation, more than anything, PSYOP PR campaign by the government, documented, thanks to, and explained to us and laid out quite nicely by Mike Bennett. What's his book called?
The Two Masters and Two Gospels.
Yeah. That's what it is. Two Masters, Two Gospels. Go check it out. Thanks, Dr. Future. Yes, under God and in God we trust were added during the 50s, and that was all part of the PSYOP of pitting religions against each other.
And the direct quote as to why they did this, the House report from 1956 says that they changed the national motto to "In God We Trust" because it had quote unquote psychological value.
Exactly.
So, there you go.
Yep.
It's not this whole thing that Bob is complaining about was one giant psyop.
That's exactly the point.
But he's not realizing it, and he's blaming white people and all Republicans, and thus becomes part of the psyop. Bob, come on, Bob.
Exactly. So every point that he's making here is a reference to a purposeful, highly planned, very well executed operation by the U.S. government. So when you talk about Great Replacement and the Great Replacement theory or the replacement theory or whatever, or even just the concept of Christian white nationalism was created as a PSYOP in the mid 20th century. And now it's being
supercharged with race, because back then it was communism.
Right. Yes, it was first against communism and then switched over to race. And it's being positioned as, again, a beautiful control mechanism, just pointing the gun in the other direction.
Yeah.
These fears about the Great Replacement are not fringe among conservative subgroups today. Now, he goes through a whole bunch of statistics and percentages.
QAnon believers, Republicans,
and they're
Fox
so
News.
They are so messed up in the way that he is presenting them. And I spent about at least a half hour sitting there working out the way that he lays out these numbers, because he does numbers of numbers and percentages of percentages.
Right.
And
I noticed that too.
It's so twisty turvy, and it's, obviously how to lie with statistics. I mean, he's creating a picture, and I worked it out myself. There are significantly easier ways he could have presented these numbers. And it's honestly, I would love to go through it all, and it's just not the most important way we could spend our time right now. But he goes through 4, 5, 6 paragraphs laying out polling numbers, and then sort of twists them it's just crazy. He references them against one another in strange ways that sound like one thing. They yield
high numbers. They yield high percentages that make it seem like it's a bigger issue than it really might be.
Exactly. Yeah. So he'll get to put the number like 45%, but if you go back and like deconstruct the weird roadmap of percentages that he lays out, you're like, oh, this is like 0.1%. Okay, right. Weird. Why does he just wanted to put big numbers. Anyways, I'm sorry. I spent too much time complaining about that. The Department of Homeland Security has declared that white supremacists remain, this is a quote, remain the most persistent and lethal threat in the homeland.
Problem, reaction, solution.
Exactly. President Joe Biden, importantly, became the first U.S. president to use the words white supremacy in his inaugural address.
Oh, gosh.
Weird. I mean, I'm pretty sure we had some pretty racist presidents. Why didn't they use it?
Well, why didn't Trump use it? I mean, he's the most white supremacist man ever. How come he didn't say it? Maybe he did, and he denounced it.
And Trump wasn't a segregationist. Yeah. And Biden was.
Yeah.
And in the wake of the massacre in Buffalo last weekend, he called white supremacy a, quote, poison running through our body politic. But while each identified white supremacy and dangerous ideologies, there is no acknowledgement of the documented ways right-wing Christianity has nourished these views. Nourished. The right-wing Christianity has nourished white supremacy. There is a troubling religious double standard in the U.S.
Oh, tell us about it.
I would love to. One which threatens our safety and our democracy. If these same kinds of appeals and violent actions were being made and committed by Muslims, for example.
What aboutism?
Most white Americans would be demanding actions to eradicate a domestic threat from radical Islamic terrorism. Hans, have we ever suffered radical Islamic terrorism in this country?
I believe there was back in 21 years ago.
Something is sort of ringing a bell.
Yeah, there was these buildings that went down.
Oh,
I was a wee young teenager. Actually, I was a little older.
Well, that's not what Robert's talking about.
Oh, no, what is he talking about?
Because Robert is talking about here, eradicated domestic threat from radical Islamic terrorism, a term we heard relentlessly during the Trump era. But because Christianity is the dominant religion in this country, its role in supporting domestic terrorism has been literally unspeakable. The clear historical record and contemporary attitudinal data.
Attitudinal data, interesting.
Attitudinal data.
Is that sentiment analysis?
You know what? Yeah.
Attitudinal data.
This attitudinal data is a term that's been coming up a lot recently.
Like polls?
Yeah, it's kind of like polls, but but this term has been popping up pretty much every week. Attitudinal data was also used in the Glorify app article too.
Interesting.
So it feels like kind of a new thing that they're popping in.
It sounds like sentiment analysis is what to me. I mean,
I would have
social
to social
media scraping and stuff like that to see what
I haven't
people are
dug into
about.
it, but that must basically be what it is. The clear historical record and contemporary attitudinal data merit an urgent discussion of white Christian nationalism as a serious and growing threat to our democracy. If we are to understand the danger in which we find ourselves today, we will have to be able to use the words white Christian nationalism and domestic terrorism in the same sentence.
You just did it. You just did it, Bob, and you
we've been
didn't capitalize
doing
"if" on the last sentence.
That's true.
Who is editing this piece here?
Apparently nobody. Yeah, he starts a sentence with a lowercase I.
Oh, man. Come on, bro.
And he's also acting as if white Christian nationalism and domestic terrorism have not been uttered in the same sentence before, which pretty much
he came up with the concept, man. He's breaking through for Time magazine.
It's been on a repeat since 2016, those two words together. But it's interesting because that is what he claims. He just ends it with, we'll have to use the words white Christian nationalism and domestic terrorism in the same sentence.
Yeah,
there's nothing else. Because what is the action? What is the call to action? I was going to say,
that's the call to action right there is associate white Christian nationalism to domestic terrorism. Anytime you say white or Christian or nationalism or all three together, preferably, you're talking about domestic terrorists. So, the White House, we are domestically terrorized by the building.
Now, let me make a statement that I think will make a point. Mm-hmm. Gons, I think. Well,
this, by the way,
you are
our
a person
roadmap,
of color.
Yeah. By the way, our roadmap to this episode has completely exploded. So
we're totally
we're tackling important issues. So I guess it's okay.
We're gonna go late, and that's just what's gonna happen. I'm as personally. So you're our person of color here.
Sure,
for those who are just listening who don't know, I've definitely heard. You're a Japanese descent. Mm-hmm. I am a white Christian man. Mm-hmm. Now, as a white Christian man, I can confidently and enthusiastically denounce the very idea of white Christian nationalism. The idea that, America is for white Christians. It is a nation for white Christians. That is false. It's just patently false. It is evidently, obviously erroneous. It is unbiblical. And it is ahistorical. And it is, there's a laundry list of reasons why the idea that America is for white Christians and no one else is patently ludicrous. Now, unfortunately, for some reason, there are moments where I find my fellow white Christian unable to sort of say those things. And if this guy is coming in here saying we need to talk about white Christian nationalism and domestic terrorism in the same sentence, look, I'm not saying I'm not convinced to go ahead and equate those things, but my experience has been every white Christian I have literally known in my entire life, personally at least, would agree with me with the statements that I just said. But the problem is that the Times Magazine and the news corporations, that's not a very profitable thing for them to report on. It is much more profitable for them to report on the minority of, admittedly, there are racists, and there are some Christian racists.
I would even argue
imagine that there
yeah.
are some white Christian nationalist racists.
I was going to say it's even muddier than that. I would say because, in a sense, you can argue that there, especially in Europe, maybe not. I mean, I guess you can argue some of it in the U.S., but some of the things that have happened in some European countries, you have to at least see that, there is kind of a genocidal replacement feel to some of the things happening. I'm not saying that that's what it's,
in
based on
the
theories per se, but I'm just saying in terms of the actions that have taken place. So
you're talking about the terrorist attacks, the shootings?
No. I'm talking about just the cultural population, like Sweden, for example. UK, you can argue.
Well, I can't speak for other countries. I'm not going to speak for other countries. I'm just
saying that that's what I hear is it's not so much like, oh, the white race is being taken over. It's more like, hey, our sort of long storied culture in these countries is being dismissed.
But see, it's different for the U.S. It's different for the U.S. because you talk about the Nordic countries. They have
They have
their history goes thousands of years.
Right.
It's
the more challenging in the U.S. because
a little over 200 years old.
Yeah.
And if you talk about a U.S. culture, look, I love the U.S. I love American history. I love American culture. I'm a huge fan. But it's a little different because our history is not so long.
We don't have the same kind of.
But honestly, that's not even like I personally do not see that as a threat. I mean, what are they going to? I mean, given that the U.S. most of our history was even like made up, and a lot of it actually isn't true, and a lot of it is a full-on psyop, as we discussed with the Cold War, religious war. Started by the government, I mean, the whole country's history has an element of psyop. And so, once you see that and that, you realize, American history has been controlled by, elite lizard people forever. And whatever we hold as some sort of sacred history has been created.
Modern mythologies,
Yeah, it's modern mythologies. But that's not even the point. I mean, the point is that as a white Christian man, reading this sort of article is disappointing because, of course, there are bad people. There are bad Christians. There are bad white Christians. And there are indeed white Christian nationalists that believe that, this place is meant for us and nobody else. I don't personally follow the argumentation for that very easily.
Yeah, but even amongst those people, not all of them are violent or want to do violent things and all that kind of. I mean, it gets really minutiae.
Even by the numbers, they're not all violent. Yeah. And that is not to sort of denounce or deny the violence that has been done. But the point is, when you look at this, the past couple weeks after the Buffalo shooting, and you see the massive mobilization of the information flow to basically lump in all Christians,
Yeah. There's a hurting happening for sure in terms of categorizing and labeling.
You think about 9/11, right? When the country, again, from the top down, from the government all the way down, used the psychological operation of basically convincing us that all Muslims were terrorists. Yeah. And then we spent the past 20 years trying to deprogram the idea that every Muslim individual is some sort of violent terrorist.
Right. That was really the seeds of the wokeness that we're experiencing now. Which is
patently part of the liberal mission, is to convince everybody that not every Muslim is a terrorist. And I think that is a noble.
Yes, we agree.
It seems obvious now, but if you did not live through it, which a lot of our younger listeners didn't live through it.
Yeah, it's true.
There was a time, much like almost exactly like what we're living through now, pointed towards white Christians as, they're all terrorists and they all want to kill us. And this is just, look at their literature, look at their sermons, look at their everything. Look, they just love, they just make American great again. See, come on. Can't you see it? The same thing was done in the early 2000s towards Muslims. And there was a concerted, long social, it was kind of the key that opened the door to what social justice is today, was convincing everybody that not every single individual Muslim was a violent terrorist. And yet we are watching an exact repeat of the playbook just towards white Christians now. I mean, it's like, I can't even take it personally because it's no different than them repeating the playbook of COVID and monkeypox.
Yes,
and they're just it's
the marginalizing of a group.
Almost a 1-for-1 comparison. Between the COVID narrative playing out and what we're seeing the monkeypox narrative playing out.
It creates an enemy in the narrative, and then you give fuel to. And I'm not sorry to say this, but it will fuel a lot of people of color, probably some fellow Japanese people that'll read this article and say, "Oh, they're evil, wait a man, they don't go to churches, make you supremacy or whatever, those people are going to be out there, and they'll use an article like this from Time Magazine, a well-established outlet, to be racist towards white people. I mean, that was crazy, but that's probably what's going to happen here.
Let me wrap it up with this.
Sure.
My concern with this movement identifying this pattern, once again, we've seen it. It's very familiar to us.
Yeah.
Just pointed in a different direction now. My call to action is, Christians must start being very vocal, because what's also part of this is they are tricking Christians. And I can feel it I can feel myself walking the edge as I'm talking about this, and as I'm reading it. There is a bait set for all white Christians here to see this as a threat to them.
Exactly.
And to respond in a way that will confirm to any outside observer that indeed, we're hostile.
Right.
But the call to action for me personally, and I invite people to do the same, which is, our holy scriptures, the Bible, have so much to say about racism and even nationalism and even all sorts of these things. It is time to become educated, to get into your Bible, to prepare your mind, your intellect, your spirit, to respond, not in hostility or defensiveness to this situation, but to equip yourself to educate those who want to lump you in with this group, white Christian nationalists. There is so much there that not just the Old Testament or the New Testament or the words of Jesus, or throughout, there are axiomatic ways of describing God's attitude, both towards racism, nationalism, violence, all these things that are simply not understood nor care to be understood by people writing articles like this. And much like how a lot of the testimonies of, regular Muslim people living in the U.S. in the early 2000s had to sort of steel themselves and prepare themselves to prove that they are not terrorists, and to make a case for themselves. This is a very real situation that Christians, white Christians specifically, are going to need to be prepared for. And do not be baited by these types of things. Do not be baited by preachers and teachers and YouTubers and whoever who want to get you into a sort of defensive, combative space with culture, because that is just going to fuel this culture war, and it is not going to work out well for us.
Well, I appreciate that, and the thing that kept popping into my mind when I was really kind of looking into the Great Replacement. What is the actual Great Replacement taking place?
Are you referring to like a spiritual one?
Well, maybe. But more so in the context
of the political one.
Not just political, but
tell me. Okay,
so while the media want to spin up this race war, this sort of racial, I'm almost thinking that they want more, like you said, they set the bait. They want more white Christians to sort of buy into this counter narrative, right?
Oh, they just want you to get fired up. They want you to get fired up and fight against this, and that will prove their point.
And you're right. And that they're afraid that they're being replaced, all this stuff. Meanwhile, you know what's replacing everybody? Robots and machines. I mean, think about the psyop of that. I mean, it's like it's a meme. I had a meme in my head. I don't know what the exact sort of sequence of images would be, but it would be kind of like somebody defending the white race, and then another person defending the black race, or whatever it might be, some racial tension, and then like the robot in the background saying like, "I'm going to replace you all, so you guys keep fighting while I sneak in and just take over all the things." And that's sort of, I don't know. There's a layer to this that we probably have that's a little more unique, because everything falls back to robots and machines and technology. But that's what I see, man.
And I mean, you got to include the lizard people in there. Remember, culture war has one purpose: And this is culture war. Culture war has one purpose, and that is to distract us from the people who are really pulling the strings.
Yeah.
Okay, you get caught up in a culture war and you make it your mission to fight this culture war. It is taking your attention away from the more important, sort of dialectic issue, which is the
spiritual.
elites.
Yeah. Well, the actual spiritual war taking place. You get caught up in the talk of the white supremacy, all that stuff.
Yeah.
You're wasting precious time that you could be talking about more cosmic and eternal issues. So.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and there's certainly a balance to be found. So there you go. Anyways, I feel it's very important. This is Time Magazine. This is not just some article deep in the recesses of NBC or something. This is a flagship article that's going around, meant to tie up all the loose ends of the week now or more of Great Replacement, information flow control and PSYOP being perpetrated on the country and the world. And this really put a bow on it, which signaled to me that this is an actually quite a dire situation that requires calm heads, lots of time in prayer and in the Bible, and being sort of stealing your resolve to not let your strings get pulled by those who want to suck you into a culture war. That is how we lose.